This video is going to show how to make pdadmin command line calls using the REST API services provided by the Access Manager appliance. pdadmin calls are used to create automation for the Access Manager infrastructure, such as importing users, creating users, or any other task that can be achieved using pdadmin command line. Automating REST API calls using the curl programming language for Unix has been very well documented. This video is going to focus on how to create automation using a Windows server, or how to create automation using the IBM Directory Integrator product. In order to create automation from my Windows system to the REST APIs on an appliance, a couple things have to be in place. For one, you must have accessed the appliance and downloaded a certificate for the SSL communication to the appliance, and that certificate must have been installed in the Windows registry. This can be done by simply accessing the interface using IE and then downloading the certificate. The second requirement is that the PowerShell must be at least at level 4 version. So let's take a quick look at this short script which makes a call to the pdadmin command line REST interface. The first two variables are defining the user ID and password used to access the admin console on the appliance. In our example, this is the user ID admin and the password is object00. The next three lines take the username and password and end up creating a base 64 string that is needed as a header authentication. We can now assemble the header using the authentication string. The header must have three components. The header must contain a variable called accept with a value of application/JSON. The second variable must be content type, also set to the same value of application/JSON. The third variable is authorization, which must be set to basic, and the auth.info header string. This allows for basic authentication with the appliance using the username and password we defined earlier. The next component we're defining is basically the URL we're accessing to run the pdadmin command. It is always HTTPS. It is the server name followed by /pdadmin. The next component we need to set up is the actual message body. The message body consists of three elements, the first being the administrative ID and the administrative password, and then the third component is the commands. Note that this administrative ID and administrative password are the username and password used to access the pdadmin command line tool. It is not the same as the username and password used to access the administrative console itself. Let's now take a closer look at the actual commands that we're going to be running. The commands are nothing else than an array of strings, each string being a single command that is being executed by the pdadmin command line. In this example, we're going to run a following sequence of commands. The first command that we are running is a login to a different domain. Login-a domain2 secmaster-p the password -domain domain2. The second command we're going to be running is server list within that domain. This domain has no servers configured at this point, so server list will be returning empty. We will then perform a login as secmaster and the password, and then issue again a server list, and we will see the servers that are currently configured in the default domain. This is the method you have to use in order to access subsequent domains within the default domain. This PowerShell command is needed to accept the self-signed certificate that is installed on my appliance. These lines are needed to set up the REST API call for pdadmin commands. So let us now look when we actually call the REST API. This line simply prints out the headers information as we're going to be sending it to the REST API. The next line is the actual call to invoke the REST method. We are passing it the URI, the headers, The method we're going to perform is a post, and we're going to pass it a body. This call will return a result, and we will simply display this result. So let's now run the short script. The first part of the output is the header information. Remember, we had to set content type, accept, and then the authorization. Notice that the authorization is basic and that the username and password have base 64 encoded. The result is an actual string, and the string is the return from the pdadmin command line tool. It is up to the end user to now parse this string and pull out the required information. Remember that if you're dealing with subsequent domains and not the default domain, you will have to do an additional login before you can issue commands to the subordinate domain. This short script shows the basic way how to make pdadmin calls using the REST APIs. In production, you would have to add hardening as well as error checking and error trapping to the script. Now that we have seen how to make REST API calls for pdadmin commands using the Windows environment, we can also use the Security Directory Integrator product to make REST API calls. For this example, I created a very simple assembly line. The first element in the assembly line is a script node which simply sets up the body of the message that we're going to be sending. Again, the body is literally the same body as we've seen in the Windows environment, which contains the admin ID, the admin password, and then the sequence of commands that we're going to be calling. We're setting this message as a work attribute called body. The REST API is simply called using an HTTP client connector. The client connector is configured as a call reply, and within the connection information we provided the HTTP URL, which again is HTTPS. The request method is post. In the advanced section, we're going to provide the username and password to log into the appliance console, and we're going to set the content type to application/JSON. Remember that we're using an SSL connection, therefore the certificate from the appliance must have been inserted into the key store of the TDI server running the solution. The next part we need to set up is the output map. On the output map, we have to output three components again. We have to output the accept, which we again set to application JSON. We have to also set up transfer encoding, which is again set to application JSON. And we're going to set up the body, which is the HTTP body being sent to the REST API call. The input map is what is returned after the REST call has been made. We're going to assign the HTTP body as string to a work attribute called body as string. We're going to create one more script element, and in this element all we're doing is retrieving the HTTP body as string work attribute, and we're simply going to display it in the log. So let's run this assembly line. You see the result that was printed, and it contains all the information that was also returned in our Windows example. It is now up to you to modify this assembly line to parse the result for the needed information, or to add any error handling or error conditions that can arise during running of the script. This completes the video on how to run pdadmin command lines using the REST API, using Windows, or using the Directory Integrator product. Remember that the appliance is also backwards compatible to 6x runtime installations. That means if you have a current 6x installation and you have automation using pdadmin command line tools, you can continue using those automations by simply pointing the runtime environment configuration to the appliance.